Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. I'm Sri Rao, your moderator for today's webinar titled Project Bundling, Bundling Saves Bundles. You can tell that this is going to be a very fun presentation because the title has 3 of the 5 words in the title are bundles. So 3 of the 5 words are the same word. So this is going to be a fun presentation. Let's start with a few housekeeping items. Next slide, please. If you have an issue with sound and you're using a computer speaker, please dial in using your phone. Some people sometimes have issues with their internet, and at least with the phone, you'll have another option for listening into the presentation. If there's any other issue with your webinar, please click on the chat button as seen on the screen right there, highlighted on the screen, and send a note to the host, and we will try to assist you. Next slide, please. There's also a button on the top for Q&A, so if you have any questions, you can send a question to the Q&A box, and we will answer them towards the end of the presentation. You can type in your question at any time, and the host and panelists will address these in the Q&A session after the presentation. Next slide, please. If you'd like to receive a PDA certificate for participation in this webinar, please send an email to arawebinars@ara.com. Please note that to receive a certificate, you must participate for the full hour, and we will use an attendance report to verify eligibility for the PDA certificate. Next slide, please. So it's a real honor and privilege for me to introduce our presenter, Dan D'Angelo. Dan is a good friend of mine, and we've been working together for a long time. You can read what's on the screen for Dan, and several people on this who are attending this webinar know Dan well, but I'll go through his resume, if you will, so for those of you who do not know Dan all that well. Very impressive. Dan has enjoyed a long career in transportation infrastructure, beginning with the New York State Department of Transportation, where he served in several senior roles, including Director of Design, Director of Design Quality Assurance, Deputy Chief Engineer, and Lead Innovation Coordinator. After his NISTOT career, Dan joined ARA with the Transportation Infrastructure Division as a Principal Civil Engineer. And at ARA, he has focused on innovation deployment, risk management, project management, and alternative contracting methods. He has served as a project manager on several large federal highway projects, including, and several of you may have been involved in some of these efforts, one way or another. These include Bridge Preservation Guide, Bridge Bundling Guidebook, Alternate Contracting Methods Evaluation Toolset, EDC-5 support for project bundling, and value capture. So Dan is pretty much a Renaissance man, having done a lot of different things. He's a team member for several National Academies of Sciences research projects, including mid- and long-range cost forecasting for infrastructure projects, framework for constructability analysis, and post-award contract administration for highway projects delivered using alternative contracting methods. He's an NHI, which is National Highway Institute instructor for risk management. Kind of going back to Dan's background, he's a graduate from the University of Buffalo with a BS in civil engineering, and Norwich University with an MBA in organizational leadership. He has, in addition to his PE license in civil engineering, Dan is a certified project management professional, PMP, risk management professional, PMI, RMP, and portfolio management professional, PFMP. He has been very active in national and international professional organizations, and also previously served as national chair for the SHARP Strategic Highway Research Program's Renewal Technical Coordinating Committee. Dan is the chair of the Department Advisory Board for the University of Buffalo Civil, Structural, and Environmental Engineering Department. He's a member of New York State Board for Engineering, Land Surveying, and Geology, appointed by the New York State Commissioner of Education. He has been recognized several times as an outstanding reviewer for the ASC Journal of Management and Engineering. Very broad resume, very, very well experienced. And please welcome Dan, our presenter. Dan?
Thank you, Shereen. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss what I think is a very exciting initiative, not only fun, but going to be a very exciting opportunity here, a very promising approach for agencies to potentially save time and money. So for today, we're going to cover 4 topics. First, I'm going to pose a few questions for everyone to think about over the next 40 minutes or so as we discuss project bundling. Second, we're going to get an understanding or a common definition of what project bundling is and why we should be doing more than we probably are doing already. Third, we're going to go over briefly some case studies at the state and local level, different case studies, and even a combined state and local case study. I'll do some highlights from those. Fourth, I'm going to discuss some resources available to help you with your project bundling initiatives or projects. And finally, we're going to discuss your questions. So agenda item number 1, the thought questions. So before we begin getting into the details of project bundling, here's some questions I'd like everybody to think about during this webinar. So first question, have you ever worked on a bundled project? Are you doing project bundling? Is your agency doing it? Are your clients doing it? And second, if you have worked on a bundled project, what are the work types that you've worked on? Were they just one work type, such as bridges, or are you considering project bundling for all different work types? The third question I'd like to think about is why do you bundle? What were the reasons for bundling? Another question, what delivery methods have you used? Have you considered alternative delivery methods to address your goals? A fifth question I'd like you to think about is, who did you bundle with? Did you bundle just within your agencies? Is it just your own agency bundling projects? Did you do it with a partner with a local agency? Did you partner with a state agency? If you're a town, did you partner with your county, a neighboring town? These are all different ways of doing bundling. Sixth question, is your process documented? Is it a strategic approach to project bundling in your agency? In other words, is it a standard part of your business process? And probably the biggest question I want you to think about is, if this is such a simple concept, which I hear quite a bit, you really think about this hard. If it's so simple, why are we not doing more? Okay. As you think about these questions, let's get into agenda item number 2, which is, what is project bundling and why do we want to do project bundling, right? So the simple, I'll give you the answer. If you want to skip the next 40 minutes, I'll give you the simple answer right now. It's project bundling, where it makes sense, is just one contract with multiple locations to save, right? To save time and to save resources. So let's go into a little bit more detail on what project bundling is and why we should be doing it. Before we get to the formal definition, I'd like us to have a common understanding of how our infrastructure assets, or all types of assets, are valued. This diagram shows bridge assets, but you can replace that word bridge with pavement, with guide rail, with signs, signals, whatever asset you want to, right? So a typical asset management system will look at the conditions of the assets and identify which assets need preservation or preventive maintenance treatments, those that need to be rehabilitated, or those that need to be replaced, right? So based on these condition assessments, the agency's goals, their funding levels, and a lot of other considerations, the agency will typically prioritize a list of actions for their assets. Again, this slide is directly from FHWA's Bridge Preservation Guide. and is also found in the FHWA's Bridge Bundling Guidebook, which I'll talk more about in a minute. And I'll show some case studies later on how project bundling has worked for all different types of assets and conditions. Right. So with this basic understanding of how asset management works and how assets are evaluated and the needs are determined, let's get to the definition. So as defined by Federal Highway Administration, project bundling is awarding a single contract for several preservation, rehabilitation, or replacement projects. Right? This concept of project bundling has been around for some time, and you may have heard different terms used, such as contract aggregation, consolidation, grouping. These are all the terms that have been used. Project bundling is probably as a newer term, maybe than what you've heard typically in the past, but the idea here is to be a systematic way of approaching your asset conditions, right? So what we found, project bundling has most often been used as a kind of a one-off type of an application, a special project or special program. Right, so the single contract can be procured in many different ways. It can include design bundling. It can include, commonly everyone thinks of construction, but also design and say some of the environmental processing, right? And again, it can be considered for all types of assets, and it's often combined with other innovation initiatives such as ACMs we've mentioned. Sri mentioned value capture as a way of funding a program. We've seen it with value capture. We've seen it used with public-private partnerships on a larger scale and a longer term, including operations and maintenance components. So a lot of variations to it, but that's in a nutshell what project bundling is. So another definition I just want to get on the table is project bundling program. Kind of use these words intermixedly and really the two different things. So basically, a program is multiple project bundle contracts, right? It can be for similar work types. I know in New York we did a bridge bundling program that was broken into 3 or 4 contracts, for example. Or it could be a program of project bundlings that has different work types. So there are some bundles for preservation, some bundles for rehabilitation, some bundles for replacement. Right? And that putting them together would be considered a project bundling program. So why do we do project bundling? Pretty simple, right? We do it to address our program goals. What are our objectives that the agency is trying to achieve? We do it to address the infrastructure asset needs, to address backlog of work. It could be pavement work, could be bridge work, again, safety hardware. It's really, we do it to improve system performance. Because if we do it right and we do pick the right projects, it can save costs, it can save time, and it can save personal resources. So how does project bundling do all of this? So basic underlying principle is economies of scale, right? So capitalizes on these economies of scales to increase efficiency. It's maybe common sense, but when you think it through, if more of the same work is done repetitively, prices tend to be lower based on the quantities, and the efficiency of the output or the work performed become more efficient doing it and lowering costs. And so as single types of work are perfected by contractors or designers, they can become more efficient at delivering them. And so bundling, again, is a key point. Bundling projects that have shared features can leverage this design expertise and construction expertise to achieve these economies of scale. Well, it can save money by more efficient use of resources, right? Preparing one contract versus 3 or 4 contracts for say individual projects becomes more efficient. It's maybe not proportionally, but preparing one contract is a lot less work than preparing 3 or 4 contracts, for example. Project bundling also streamlines, right? It streamlines several processes or several processes. We've seen we've actually seen projects where the design process has been bundled and then the contract separated. So you can think in those terms of individual processes or combining these processes for streamlining. So you can streamline the various project delivery requirements, such as the environmental agreements, standardizing designs, repetitive or standardized construction techniques. It saves time by allowing projects to be done sooner. Right, there's a public benefit to project bundling where you can deliver improved transportation assets sooner than otherwise would be, therefore providing this benefit to the public sooner. Right, contracting delivery times can be shortened depending on the delivery method you use, and the way the bundling is put together. The use of, again, we mentioned the use of agency resources. Preparing one contract versus multiple contracts is a big benefit to agencies. So I know we've mentioned ACMs, or alternative contracting methods, quite a bit on here, and we see all different kinds of alternative contracting methods used in project bundling. So the right method depends on your goals and also on your risk assessment, right? So in the simplest of terms, project delivery methods are different ways of allocating risk. So here is a graphic coming out of the Bridge Bundling Guidebook that shows how the different common delivery methods are organized. Construction manager, general contractor, or CMGC is particularly beneficial for allocating risk to the most appropriate party as your project is developed. Design build also generates improved collaboration during project delivery and construction, though there's more risk are transferred to the design builder than, say, in CMGC or design bid build. We've also seen project bundling take advantage of public-private partnerships, and typically for a large program, a statewide program, or for long-term operation and maintenance components that are included. This slide here demonstrates or displays a look at the different delivery methods and how risks are allocated amongst those different delivery methods. So as I mentioned, the different project delivery methods really at the basic level are nothing more than different ways allocating risks to the different parties involved in the contract, right? So the important point here is conducting a risk assessment is critical to determining the most important project delivery method for your project, right? This graphical representation of how risks are allocated shows how risks are allocated between the agency and the contractor. Right? And again, the key thing is you need to understand what you're trying to accomplish from your project goals and objectives in order to evaluate the threats and opportunities to achieving that. I'm going to mention a resource later that can help you with your risk processes specifically to project bundling. All right, so we've identified 6 steps, if you will, or stages of an agency's maturity, where they are with project bundling. And I want to show this to give a quick description. So as you think about those questions we started out with, where does your agency or where do the clients that you work with, where are they in this, say, maturity level of project bundling? So if we look at, an agency that may be at stage 1 or level 1, right? They're not implementing project bundling. They've never done it. They're not considering it. 2 would be a development stage. They may have no formal policy or process or tools in place. Taking an ad hoc approach to project bundling, they maybe use it when on occasion, right? So 3 is demonstration stage. An agency has some basic project bundling processes and tools. They've used them more than once, but not necessarily standardized. And the approach kind of varies from project to project. Going to level 4, stage 4, an agency, this assessment stage. So an agency has, say they have some organizational standard processes in place for developing project bundling. It's documented, right? So they have supporting methods, tools, staff training to incorporate project bundling in their business processes. An agency at stage 5 would be institutionalized. These processes are documented. The tools are established. The staff is being trained in the nuances of project bundling, and it's a way of doing their business, right? And then stage 6 would be an agency that's capturing lessons learned and their practices. They're applying it for continuous improvement. They're improving their processes. They have performance metrics, for example, and getting some quantitative feedback on how they're doing. So I will tell you in the work that we've done and looking at case studies, and we've done 25 agency case studies on different project bundlings and developed some guidance on behalf of HWA, there are some agencies such as Indiana DOT is getting to this institutionalized stage. We've seen, moving from 4 to 5, we've seen very few agencies, we've seen none actually in an optimized, where people are collecting data and reporting back to fix the processes. So the majority of people are on this maybe pilot and developing a project or program stage, right? So when you think of project bundling, we'd like to, the ideal goal would be to make it just a way of doing business in your agency. So how do you evaluate yourself on these agencies or on these stages? It's a really good question. I'm glad you are asking. I am going to show you some common practices that we have found across different agencies. So this list is, there's 25 practices that have been identified through our case study analysis for those people that are practicing project bundling. So FHWA is currently in the process of developing a tool for agencies to evaluate these practices. I will tell you that what we're finding is these first 5 here, early decisions, determining the appropriate size, larger is not necessarily better. Limiting by work type, considering geography, geographic location, distances, and outreach, particularly to the industry. These first 5 are probably all required practices to do project bundling. The others depend on what the agency guidelines, laws, regulations are. And I'll point out a couple key ones. 7, local partnering. Some agencies have gone to work with local agencies, for example, local agencies working together to do project bundling. Number 19 is using ACMs. Are you considering them for project bundling? Do you have the authority to do different techniques? So these practices can all be evaluated by your agency and where you are. And I'm going to show you this next slide. Is part of this evaluation tool being developed by FHWA. So it's a draft. This is what it looks like at the moment. It currently allows an agency to evaluate those 25 relevant practices on project bundling to different phases of project development and identify areas for improvement. And the resulting product is an action plan for improving the practices. So this tool appears to be a real and excellent self-evaluation tool for agencies. I'm very excited to see that when this gets published and put out, how well it's received and how it can help agencies improve their project bundling practices. So this example just shows this agency happened to pick these of the 25 practices. These were the 13 practices that they were deploying, and they evaluated them, how those practices were applied in different phases of the project development process, and then each practice gets ranked here, and then this results in an output where they can then identify actions to improve their processes for each of those practices. So it's a pretty nifty tool. Looking forward to seeing that. All right, so how have agencies gotten started, right? Where have we seen agencies start project bundling? So based on our research and the case study analysis, we really see 2 methods or 2 processes agencies are using for project bundling. So on the left-hand side here, what I've labeled a project basis, this would be probably the more common method that we've seen is this is done in 2 different ways. Agencies take a look at their existing capital program, what's on their STIP or TIP, and they review that program that was planned for the next 5 years or 10 years and look for opportunities for bundling projects. So they look for similar work types, they pull them off, and they bundle them together into a bundled project and update their capital program. Some agencies have gone to going back to that chart of the asset management program, where they're actually, as they're looking at their assets, identifying the condition, identifying the needs, they're actually bundling similar work types and projects at that stage and placing it on the program as a bundled project. So on the left side, this primary method of looking at either your existing program or when you're programming, looking for opportunities to bundle, how project bundles are being put on an agency's capital program. The other method, or second, on the right-hand side of the screen is what I label an initiative basis. So this again also has two components to it, and the first component is an agency received some additional funding or luckily got a tax increase and all of a sudden to address their infrastructure needs. So they're achieving that program or initiative through project bundling, or using project bundling to help them achieve that program. I think of going back to 2008 or so, the American Recovery and Rehabilitation Act, right? There was a lot of money to come in to agencies to help with the economic recovery, a lot of work to get out. How can they do that, and how can they utilize all that money but also get the biggest benefit out of it from an infrastructure and job creation point of view? So they use things like project bundling can be used to help achieve that. And we may see something like this as the economy and the FAST Act expires at the end of September. There may be some additional funding coming into agencies where project bundling may be very appropriate. And so the other component of the initiative basis approach that we've seen to project bundling is agencies have used project bundling as a way of justifying a special initiative or program. So they're using it to convince the legislature, their governor, their leadership in the organization that, hey, if we use project bundling, we can do all this work. So can we have an initiative to do that. And so project bundling is a way of justifying or helping make the case for the initiative. So again, two different ways, more of a project approach and more of an initiative approach. Okay. So once you've got a project bundling identified, you have these needs. So how do you actually do that? How do you actually get that project bundling in place? Well, FHWA has published an awesome guide, the Bridge Bundling Guidebook that Sri mentioned. I've mentioned already, and I'll show you a link to it later on. But that Bridge Bundling Guidebook includes a 10-step process on how to bundle projects. Even though it's specific to bridge bundling, the process basically is the same for all work types. Each chapter in the guidebook is a step in the process, and each chapter includes a clear definition of what the objective of that chapter is. It provides tools for the agency or the users to achieve those objectives that's intended for that chapter, and it also outlines exactly what the outcomes of that step in the process should be. And just really quickly, if we go through this, right? Do you understand what a successful bundling project is? Do you know what your goals are? Is the funding or financing in place? What's your outreach to industry, internally and externally outreach? Have you done your risk assessment? Do you know what your threats and opportunities are to that? Have you selected the right work types? With all that as a basis, you can now do a good analysis of choosing the most appropriate project delivery method. Then also you got to consider how you're doing your environmental reviews and your preliminary design. You then can create your bundle and let the contract. And step 10 is there's some guidance in here on how to do quality assurance. There are some nuances with several remote locations, geographic distances, and how they're handled. And of course, you want to close out and capture those lessons learned and celebrate your achievements. This slide is one of the chapters. My favorite chapter, the risk assessment, as Sri mentioned during the introduction. I do a lot of stuff around risk assessment. So I'm using this as an example. This is right from the guidebook. It shows you the objective, right? So the objective of this chapter is to formally identify initial project risks, not only the threats, but the opportunities, the tools that are provided. The chapter includes the risk process overview specific to project bundling, the list of threats and opportunities, some checklist, if you will, of potential threats and opportunities specific to project bundling, and it also includes potential responses for those threats and risks. And the outcome here would be a risk management plan and project risk register. So a great resource. I encourage you to look at that, and I'll give you the link to that in a few minutes. So in summary, our agenda item number 2 is why do we do project bundling? We do it to reduce costs, right? Project bundles with the same shared features allows you to take leverage and take advantage of the efficiencies in design and construction, take advantage of those economies of scale. It can expedite project delivery, right? So it's a strategic program solution. It can streamline various processes such as environmental agreements and standardized design, and combining individual projects maybe sooner than later in a program. And then the third point here is the efficiencies. We've talked about the contracting efficiencies using a single contract award, for example, over multiple contracts as a way of streamlining and making better use of agency resources. And reducing your agency costs. Okay, next on our agenda is item number 3 is case studies. So I'm going to highlight 7 case studies to support what we had just talked about on the why and what it is and why. We're going to cover 3 state departments of transportation. I'm going to cover 3 local lead county-based project bundling initiatives. And the 7th one, Nebraska, is actually the Nebraska County Bridge Match Program is actually a really great example of a local program managed by the state. So it's a state-local collaboration. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in these case studies. I just have one slide in each one of them. I'm going to very briefly just highlight a few key elements from it. I'll end this session by showing you some of the lessons learned from all these case studies. If you want more detail on these case studies, they're all in the Bridge Bundling Guidebook or in FHWA's website for project bundling, or will be issued soon as part of the EDC5 initiative. And we provide a lot more detail on each of these case studies. So our first case study I want to talk about is a bridge in Kentucky. So this is a really good example of outreach and communication, right? It was a strategic approach. It was an initiative to improve their bridge conditions in Kentucky. It's a large team. There is an extensive amount of coordination and communication with all the stakeholders in the state, not only in the agency, but with the contracting organization, the consulting engineering, community and so forth, local agencies, the users to help implement this program, right? So they've engaged all these stakeholders in the industry, utility companies, permitting agencies, and to ensure the program is successful. So they've done an outstanding job. They have a nice logo. They have some great communication, catchy name, all very important from the outreach and communication perspective of a large program. So they've taken advantage of standardized design. They've taken a risk-based approach to the geotechnical conditions where they've had it and where they've not. They've coordinated and expedited utility relocations through the program. And they've bundled similar work types in multiple bundled projects, right? So it's not one big program, it's a multiple projects. So Bridge in Kentucky is a great way if you want to learn how to get initiative off the ground and how you would communicate and do outreach. They're a prime and great example. Second case study is at the local level, Erie County, New York, which includes the city of Buffalo. As a former season ticket holder of Buffalo Bills, I'm pretty sure this is the year they're gonna win the Super Bowl if the NFL plays. I think this is their year finally. Anyhow, it's a great example of a county using bundling to maintain the bridge assets. So take a look at the different work types, right? So they have bundled contracts, kind of like an IDIQ type contract that deals with steel repairs, deck repairs, bridge washing, and sealing. They bundle these projects together, and they instead of doing all this different type of work on one bridge project, they bundled it by work type, and it becomes much more efficient and effective for them to manage their program to do to maintain their bridge assets. And this was put together by their county bridge engineer, and they're using federal funds for some of these work types to achieve this program. You can see it's a multi-year program. Again, the key point on this case study is the different work types and how they bundle them in separate and individual bundling contracts. Going back to a state DOT, Indiana DOT, I mentioned earlier, they're the state that's probably in that level 5, or very close to that level 5 of maturity. They're in the process of developing a business process that will be part of the agency standard practice for bundling. They actually did some research. There's a really, really great study done by Purdue University that documented the savings that Indiana DOT was receiving from bundling. And that study, a summary of that study, and the details are included in the Bridge Bundling Guidebook. So, you know, I want to point out a couple things here. They've, again, they've looked at very carefully at the different project work types. So they've bundled bridges, culverts, and roads, pavements. So they separated that into, again, by work type into bundles. They have efficiencies, found some efficiencies in just doing environmental approvals and permitting it as a group of projects as opposed to individual projects, right? They've been able to accelerate, jumping down here to the schedule acceleration, accelerate what was their regularly planned work and how they were able to move it up. Probably most importantly, through the academic research and studies that they've done on it, they've documented the actual savings that they're getting from project bundling on an annual basis, around $50 million a year. And what their legislature has done is instead of that savings going back to state, they've given it back to the Indiana DOT to do more work, right? So even though they're saving money, it normally would have been savings to the state says, well, this is such a great program and you're doing so much more work. That's that savings is back to the agency to do more work. So it's a way of improving their conditions even faster than they were by getting more work done within the same amount of money. So very impressive program. Again, probably one of the leading programs in the country. I'm going to go back to another local public agency, Northampton County in Pennsylvania. They have 119 bridges. This was a bridge bundling guidebook. They were in pretty poor condition overall. Their standard program was laid out for 20 years to get these fixed. They decided to go in a bigger scale and look at public-private partnerships using availability payments to fix all these bridges at once in a bundle project. So they're looking at this program to save them 8 years. It's also a bundle program that's including a maintenance component for those replaced bridges and repaired bridges. And you can see how the 33 bridges will be replaced over the 14 years of the program. So this is an example of a delivery method of public-private partnerships, long-term, including operation and maintenance on it, and addressing a system or the agency's overall conditions of the bridges, improving them more all at once than as opposed over a longer time frame. Delaware DOT. Here's another work type. They have some bundling projects, programs on their culvert. So they had a culvert issue that needed that were a lot of culverts were in poor condition. They all needed to be replaced. So they looked at bundling. Instead of doing culvert by culvert or when we're doing a highway project to this area, we'll fix that culvert. They said, let's pull all these culverts out and do them together as a bundled program, right? So they have a bundled program. That was their objective of fixing all these poor conditions. But they looked at the individual locations and said, well, we should bundle, depending on the risk with the locations, they bundle them using different delivery methods. So here's a program that didn't use just one project delivery method, but used multiple project delivery methods. They use design, bid, build, IDIQs, and design, build. Right? And then obviously how the design and how the environmental process is handled differently for each one of them. But they've been very successful and very happy with how they were able to improve their overall culvert program, culvert assets in the state of Delaware through project bundling. Minnesota DOT, going back to a state DOT, this primary example here is a great example of a different work type. I know we've talked a lot about bridges and pavements, but don't forget there's a lot of other work types, from signs, signals, in this case ADA, right? Every state has an ADA compliance a plan in place, and typically my experience is a lot of the ADA work is done when we're in that area doing another project, right? So Minnesota's taken a different approach. They said, geez, this is a great opportunity to bundle these. I mean, it's just kind of a specialty activity. What better way than bundling it and having a contractor do the design and construction? They can become very efficient and effective at it. They understand the issues they see. They can apply it to the future ones. So the success, they had, point out some issues here they've encountered. The issue when doing specialty work is something to consider is a lot of the specialty contractors may never have been a prime before, and do they know the process? So it's something to keep in mind. Be careful, especially if you're using design build. You don't want to be over prescriptive where you should be or don't have to be, right? And this may have been a case where, in hindsight, maybe progressive design build or CMGC might have been a better delivery method. Not that it wasn't successful, but these are some lessons learned that they're going to be applying back to future programs. All right, the last case study is one of my favorites, is Nebraska County Bridge Match Program. So this was a statewide initiative through their legislature. They identified this program called the County Bridge Match Program that was state funded. I believe it goes through 2023, and the whole idea behind the program was to promote innovative repair and replacements for bridges, for locally owned bridges on county road systems. And they have a lot of farm to market, and very critical to their economy. The interesting part is Nebraska said, hey, one of the innovations, if locals want to get together, is project bundling or bridge bundling. That is considered very innovative. And if they had done it, that will help them win, because this was a competitive program, so they have to submit applications. So if counties got together and submitted bundled bridge programs together, that was looked upon very favorably as being an innovative approach, mainly due to these efficiencies we talked about in saving money. So that's what this program is all about. They mainly was design, bid, build, but they also had the legislation provided them to use design, build, and construction manager general contractor. Again, 100% state funded. And the biggest lesson they probably learned out of this was a couple of proposals had the lead on the contract was split between the different counties that were coming together. They found it better to have one county in the lead, and they've come up with standard templates that do that. So this is a great example of a state-local collaboration. So what are some lessons learned in all these case studies? And again, these were just 7 that I've highlighted here very briefly. There's another up to 25 case studies that have been prepared on project bundling that cover all kinds of aspects of it. But some of the key lessons that we're finding through these case studies is, where there's complex right-of-way or right-of-way requirements, we all know the length of the right-of-way process can take time and create issues. So got to make sure there's minimal right-of-way issues. If you have one project that has maybe an environmentally sensitive area, it's probably not a good idea to include that with other projects that maybe not have environmental issues, because the one could slow down the whole project, or you'll have to take it out. A lot of the people working on bridge bundling projects have found that you got to do hydraulic analysis in advance is preferred to avoid surprises. The geotechnical information is obviously very important. The more you have, the better. Stay away from railroads. I think anybody that worked in the state DOT, it doesn't matter what issue we seem to talk about, but railroad involvements seem to create complications. The local public agency lead is the Nebraska lesson learned. I just mentioned that. Outreach to industry is very important. Not only engineering and construction community, do they have the capacity? Do they understand what's coming down the road? No surprises. Get their input is very important. And again, we're seeing a lot of use of ACMs with other innovation, again, based on the goals and risk for that project. So these are some of the key lessons that we've learned from these case studies. All right, I'm just going to wrap up really quickly here on some additional resources that are available for those that are interested in learning more about project bundling or trying to improve their agency's practices with project bundling. So first, we've mentioned several times this Bridge Bundling Guidebook. Here's a picture of the cover. You just Google FHWA BBG, it'll come up. Or go to the EDC5 website. There's a link to the Bridge Bundling Guidebook, and that includes that 10-step process I talked about. I think I've mentioned, if I not, I should have, project bundling is an FHWA Everyday Counts 5 innovation initiative. So you can go to FHWA's EDC5 website. The two leads for this initiative are Romeo Garcia and David Unkeper. Outstanding resources are available here. Both of them are very great people to work with, and they will help you. And there's some resources that they're providing through this initiative that will be very, very helpful for your agency. So check out that EDC website. And as part of the EDC effort, so currently under development is a quick start reference. This quick start reference is a supplement or complement to the Bridge Bundling Guidebook I talked about. It includes additional case studies, but it addresses the different work types and more specifics on determining the appropriate bundle size. Right, help some guidance on how to do that. It includes that self-assessment that we showed earlier. One thing I didn't mention is a product that's being produced by FHWA is a database of resources, not only the case studies, but also a database of all the research that's been done, actual contract documents from different agencies, and contracts, research, and the reference documents, whether our agency has a reference document or FHWA's produced it, there's a list of those references and a summary of what they are. FHWA is also putting out a webinar series on project bundling. It actually starts next month. July 15th is the first webinar in the series. It coincides with project bundling being the EDC5 Innovation of the Month starting for July. So they'll kick off the webinar series. That's the third Wednesday of every month. They'll go into all kinds of details on project bundling. So you may take a look at the webinars and see which ones are of interest to you, and please sign up for them. And again, I mentioned that the additional case studies are included in the Quick Start reference are being produced. And also don't forget, especially if you're an agency, every state has a State Transportation Innovation Council, a great resource to working with your state agencies on EDC5 initiatives. As part of that, they have you can submit applications for a demonstration, so innovations and innovation initiatives are all eligible for that. You can maybe get some money to do some training or some technical assistance for project bundling. I threw up here SHARP 2. It has a lot of great resources, for example, on risk management and project delivery methods, right? And the last thing I'm showing here is increased federal share for project levels. I think everybody probably recognizes or realizes or knows that innovation, you can get your projects can be 100% federally funded. It doesn't give you more federal funds, but there's not necessarily a state match if you use certain innovation techniques. And we'll have to see how the FAST Act reauthorization, what that includes. Okay, I'm ending my presentation just with a quick summary here of what we've covered. And we started out with these thought questions. Hopefully you were thinking about them throughout the presentation. The big question really was why are we not doing more of this? Hopefully today we've given something to think about on choosing or on doing more. We answered the question of what is project bundling and why. Project bundling is multiple locations in an individual project, considering work types and other factors such as geographic location. Okay? And we gave 7 examples of case studies and the lessons learned: small projects, big projects, state, local combined. And we ended by providing some additional resources that will hopefully be helpful for you and upcoming resources that are available. And Shri, I think I've said enough. I'm going to turn this back to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan. It was a great presentation, and I enjoyed hearing about the case studies. Meanwhile, if any of you have any questions, please type it in the Q&A portion of the screen, and I will ask Dan those questions when I see them. So I'm just going to talk about some upcoming webinars. The next one, this is going to be a first one for us. We're actually going to have a two-part series. Dr. Young Lee from ARA is going to talk about the effect of moving dynamic loads on pavement response and performance and deflections performance. And there's two parts to that, deflections and back-calculated modulus, and then pavement performance. So stay tuned for that. That's the first for us with a two-part series. The month after that, in September, Ahmad Al-Hassan, Dr. Al-Hassan will talk about probabilistic safety analysis and friction management. So we switch gears a little bit and talk about safety and friction in September. And in October and November, we will switch gears again, and Sheila Canal from ARA will talk about pavement response to super heavy load movement. And Brian Aho on November 18th will talk about airport pavement management, past, present, and future. So Dan, I'm just going to read some of the questions I see, and then you can respond, and I'm going to paraphrase these questions. So the first question I have is Buffalo Bills, are you sure? I'm just kidding.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah. No. The first question is from Mustafa. He says, some reasons that discourage project bundling is it inhibits meeting DBE and women-owned business goals. Any feedback on this to mitigate these items?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So it's important to recognize, right, just because you're doing project bundling, especially if you're using federal aid, right? None of the federal aid rules and regulations go away, right? They're all still required. So things like Buy American and DBE setting goals, all that are still required. It's really, so my answer to that is it's really no different than any other program or project. There may be some unique challenges where you may need, for example, multiple DBE firms because of geographic, especially if it's a statewide program, right? You're not going to have the same DBE firm, say, doing whether they do pavement markings or, say, guide rail work across the whole state. So you have to do a geographic base. So that's a case where the larger the program, maybe actually a little bit more work to incorporate multiple, particularly from a contractor perspective, if it's design, build, and managing the DBEs. But nothing really changes on that. So it's not an issue. It's just something you can't really forget about as well.
All right. So the next question is from Joe, and he has asked, when will the quick reference, start reference, and other documents that you mentioned earlier in the presentation, the self-assessment and everything, be available?
Yeah, great question. They're all in draft and in review stages at the moment. So I'm expecting in the next few months that they'll all be published. I'm not exactly sure in what order. I think the quick start reference will be out there first. The self-assessment. These are all tools being developed to support the EDC5 initiative. So they're all in the final draft stages. So I expect in the next month or two, depending on final comments and the review process, very soon, by the summer for sure.
Okay, so here's a question from Teresa. What work type is most commonly being bundled?
Yeah, another great question. So we gave, this whole initiative, when you think about it, started out as a bridge bundling initiative, right? Because that's where we were seeing a lot of bundling initiatives, and I don't know if that was driven by the asset conditions of bridges or the concern over the state of the bridges in the country, but we've seen a lot of initiatives that focused on bridges. So that seemed to be the most common one. But when we've started doing case studies in our research on project bundling, we found bundling has been used extensively for a while in a lot of different areas, and a lot of it, preventive maintenance is a great area. I mean, there's probably not one state agency that doesn't bundle bridge washing, for example, right? So some of these preventive maintenance activities or they have standby contracts like Erie County did for steel repairs. That's not uncommon to have that kind of specific work type bundled together. We've seen we give the Minnesota example of ADA, but pavement markings, for example, or guide rail repair, right? So I know in New York there was we had systems that had to be replaced on a whole scale basis, so those were done. Or if you want to do a county all at once, it's much more effective and efficient from a safety perspective to take care of that whole asset group as opposed to waiting for individual projects. So we've seen all kinds of work varieties, but I think if I had to pick one, it'd probably be bridges, only because we've got more bridge case studies than probably any other at this point. And again, bridge bundling of all different work types of bridge, right? Not just replacement, but also rehabilitation. And then those examples I gave on the say preventive maintenance components of bridges, like washing and cleaning bearings and those type of things. Deck overlays. See quite a bit of that.
Okay, so I'm going to paraphrase this next question because it actually kind of ties into what you just mentioned. So Michael is essentially asking, should you just bundle the most you can into one contract? You mentioned a bunch of different things in the answer to the last question. Is it better to get as large as you possibly can? Is bigger better?
Yeah, great question. One that we struggle with ourselves, and the research shows the answer is no. And the results that we've seen indicates that bigger is not necessarily better. The Purdue study that's in the Bridge Bundling Guidebook goes in the Quick Start reference, addresses this issue specifically. So there's kind of an elbow or an inflection point we talk about in that Quick Start reference that says here's the optimum size project for certain work types and conditions. Not that you can't get more efficiencies with larger, but they kind of, it's a dwindling efficiency. And so you got to think, if you just think some of the issues, right? Bigger often means you're spreading out more geographically, right? So you get into different parts of a say agencies, like in New York State, it's 5 hours from west to east of the state, right? So there's a time difference, and if you have a main contractor doing the work, the mobilization set up and getting to that other remote locations, how do you do that inspection? So some of these issues where some of that efficiencies start dwindling, the larger the program gets. So bigger is not necessarily better, even though logically it seems that would be the case, but not necessarily so. It has a lot of factors come to play, and again, it's my answer to all of these questions is it depends, right? That's always the correct answer. It depends on your state, it depends on your industry capacity, it depends on the work type, depends on your geography, depends on, in New York, upstate New York is a totally different environment than down in New York City. So we would probably never bundle, say, a bridge in New York City with a bridge in Syracuse, New York, for example. It's just too far geographically and totally different working environments and issues associated with delivering those projects. So bigger is not necessarily better.
All right, sounds good. We'll end with one final question, and Leonie is going to throw back your thought question back at you. If bridge bundling is simple, why are we not doing more of it?
Yeah, I'll throw my MBA hat here, and I know this is probably a standard answer people hear, but it's, anytime you're trying to do change in any organization, change management, you got to understand the change management process, right? And this is a change in the way business is typically being done. And so you need to understand that process, and it all starts with, you got to have a champion in an organization that's going to lead this effort. You got to build a coalition that will help support it, right? It's a little bit of work, and I'm a big process guy, so it is work to create a process, to have a standard process for an agency to do bundling, and it takes a while to develop it. You need to have a lot of meetings, you need to have a lot of people involved, but again, it takes a lead person to take on the initiative, building a coalition, and doing some early successes and celebrating them. The other way you see project bundling, if the innovation employed a lot, is when there's an urgency, right? So if we see something like another Recovery Act or something, that often prompts an agency to identify someone to be in charge of it and then implement it. So my answer is generic to all innovation, all change. It's the change management process. You got to understand that, and you got to follow that. It's a very structured process, right? If you look at the research on change management, you go through some very logical steps in implementing change.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. Can you give a quick short answer to this last question? Sorry. When bundling, is it better to define construction sequencing prior to letting, or is it better to allow the contractor to determine sequencing? This is a question from Melissa.
Yeah, great question, because that's where you see a lot of innovation efficiencies in how they sequence the work. So again, the answer, it depends. It depends on what your goals and objectives are. Are there certain restrictions that you have to apply? We were just on the phone yesterday talking to Idaho DOT, and on their bridge bundling program, they had three or four regions bundled together, and they had a very narrow window in over the river crossing. They had 5 weeks to do any water work. So, that had to be prescribed in the contract. This is the window you have to do this work. So you have to sequence your in-water work around this environmental requirement. So again, the answer, it depends. Again, depends on the delivery method you're using. If it's design, bid, build, you're probably going to be more prescriptive. If it's design, build, you may leave that up to the design builder, but you got to be clear on any restrictions you have. Right, so the answer, once again, is it depends.
Okay. Well, we're going to end it there. I have a couple of more slides, Dan, if you want to go to the next slide. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If you would like to request a PDA certificate and or copy of the presentation, please send an email to arawebinars@ara.com. And then next slide, Dan. I don't see the next slide coming up. Dan, if you can move to the next slide.
I did. It's not showing.
Okay. Maybe it's something with my web connection. Yeah, if you're interested in employment opportunities with ARA, transportation and infrastructure offices, please send a brief resume and contact information to www.joinara@ara.com. That's Webinar Wednesdays, www.joinara@ara.com. And we're always looking for great people to join ARA and our team. Thank you very much for joining ARA today on our Webinar Wednesdays. We look forward to you joining us on another Webinar Wednesday. Thank you very much.